Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, we are very happy to meet again on the Islamic Notes channel, where we together bring Islamic values to life through stories that are full of meaning and life lessons. Every story we present is not just entertainment, but also a reminder that in every test there is a hidden blessing. In every step, there is an opportunity to get closer to Allah. These stories teach us to remain patient, steadfast in goodness, and always be grateful for every provision of His. Don't forget to subscribe and activate the notification bell so you don't miss the stories full of wisdom that we present regularly. Support from all friends means a lot to us to continue presenting useful and inspiring Islamic content. Let's start the story. Behind the complex series of numbers and formulas, a renowned German mathematician, Dr. Hans Köhler, found something he had never imagined before: guidance. This man is a professor of applied mathematics at a prestigious university in Berlin. He has spent decades researching patterns, symmetries, and regularities in the universe. He believes that everything can be explained by logic and mathematical laws. However, one thing that shook his scientific principles was the Qur'an. This story began when he was conducting research on numerical symmetry, or symmetry of numbers, in text structures. He and his team were interested in studying various ancient books, including the Qur'an, only as samples of linguistic and numerical studies. However, when he delved into the structure of the Qur'an, he found something that made him pause in front of the screen for a long time. One of the most surprising things for Dr. Köhler was the extraordinary regularity in the repetition of certain words in the Qur'an. He noted that the word yawm, day, in its various singular forms, is mentioned 365 times, the same as the number of days in a year. The word moon is mentioned 12 times, corresponding to the number of months in the lunar calendar. Even the words sea and land are mentioned 32 times and 13 times respectively. And when calculated as a percentage, these numbers reflect the scientific ratio of the area of sea to land on Earth: 71% and 29%. At first he thought this was just a coincidence, but the more he dug, the more amazed he became. He discovered that the structure of the chapters and verses in the Qur'an contains an incredibly complex yet regular mathematical pattern. The 96th chapter, titled Al-Alaq and believed to be the first revelation, is surprisingly ranked 96th out of 114 chapters in the Mus'haf. And when he examined its verses, he found that there was a symmetrical balance in the mention of concepts such as knowledge and rid, creation and man, all closely related in a harmonious linguistic structure. When he shared his findings with his Muslim colleagues, a physics professor named Dr. Mustafa, his colleague, just smiled and said, "That is only a small part of the miracle of the Qur'an, Professor Köhler. It is not only a spiritual book, but also a book of knowledge." That statement haunted his mind for weeks. He then began to read the translation of the Qur'an more seriously, no longer as an object of study, but as someone who thirsted for the meaning of life. He discovered that this book not only contained the magic of numbers, but also the philosophical answers that he had been looking for in science and philosophy. One night he stayed up late. The verse that kept ringing in his heart was, "We will show them our signs in the far corners of the earth and within themselves, until it becomes clear to them that the Qur'an is the truth." Qs Fusilat 53. His tears slowly fell. He realized that all this time he had seen many signs, but refused to open his heart. A few weeks later, in a quiet atmosphere at his friend's house, he said the two sentences of the Shahada with a trembling but confident voice: "Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah." From that day on, Hans Köhler changed his name to Yusuf Köhler, and his life changed completely. He remained a mathematician, but now he made science a bridge to knowing the Creator. He said in one of his interviews, "Science and Islam are not two contradictory things. In fact, the more I understand mathematics and the order of nature, the more I am convinced that the Qur'an is the Word of God that could not possibly be composed by humans." After converting to Islam, Yusuf Köhler did not immediately find an easy path in life. He realized that his decision would shake many things: his reputation as a renowned academic, his social relations, even his family relationships. But one thing that kept him going was an inner peace that he had never felt before. Before, I lived in a closed, logical system. Everything had to be measurable and proven. But after I got to know the Qur'an, I realized that the real truth is not only present in numbers, but also in the light of the heart. Yusuf began to spend time learning Arabic so that he could read the Qur'an in its original language. He was amazed at how the arrangement of the verses had a perfect rhythm, a complex yet coherent rhetorical structure, and a power of meaning that penetrated the heart. One of the things that further strengthened his faith was the phenomenon of Code 19 in the Qur'an, a numerical pattern discovered by an Egyptian Muslim researcher, Dr. Rashad Khalifa, who showed that almost the entire basic structure of the Qur'an revolves around multiples of the number 19. Starting from the number of letters of the Basmala, the number of words in a particular chapter, to the number of letters and verses that form extraordinary symmetry. Although controversial among some Muslim scholars, for Yusuf, this is additional evidence that the Qur'an could not have come from an ordinary human being, especially since Muhammad ﷺ was not known as a poet, let alone a mathematician. In one of his lectures that was open to the public, Yusuf said, "If you find a book from the 7th century that is mathematically neat, full of numerical structure, linguistic rhythm, and remains relevant in spiritual content, then you are not reading a human work. You are reading revelation." However, Yusuf did not stop at numerical discoveries. He also explored the cosmological and creation aspects of the Qur'an. Verses such as, "And the heaven we built with might, and indeed we are expanding it." QS et Zariyat 47. Surprisingly, because it contains the concept of the expansion of the universe, expanding universe, which was only recognized by the world of science in the 20th century, more than 1,300 years after the verse was revealed, he realized that the Qur'an not only talks about worship, morals, and law, but also about creation, geology, biology, and astronomy in amazing language. Yusuf then devoted himself to building the Quranic Mathematics and Science Institute, a study center where Muslim and non-Muslim scientists can research more deeply the relationship between the Qur'an and science. At this institution, he facilitated international seminars, published journals, and even created software that analyzed the numerical structure of the Qur'an digitally. But behind all his new success, Yusuf also did not escape the test. Many fellow academics considered him too mystical or too religious for a scientist. Some colleagues shunned him, and some German media tried to discredit him with the narrative that he was involved in the Islamization of science. But Yusuf remained calm. He knew that the path of truth is not always accepted by everyone, and that is precisely what the Qur'an itself has warned us about. He reflected on the verse, "Do they not reflect on the Qur'an? If it were not from Allah, they would have found in it much contradiction." QS Nisa 82. Now Yusuf Köhler has become an important symbol among European Muslim scientists. He proves that faith is not in conflict with science, but rather enhances it. At the end of each of his lectures, he always reminds his students and listeners of one thing. The Qur'an is not a book of mathematics, but in it there is divine mathematics. It is not a book of science, but its contents guide scientists to know who the creator of this universe is. For me, the Qur'an is a bridge, from intelligence to submission, from logic to love, from numbers to light. And perhaps that is the greatest miracle of the Qur'an. Not just the beauty of its wording or the magic of its numbers, but its ability to change hearts, even the hearts of those who have lived their lives believing only in logic. Because when that light enters, there is no room for doubt. The light of numbers. Yusuf Köhler's intellectual legacy. Yusuf Köhler's journey did not stop after reciting the 2 sentences of the Shahada. On the contrary, that was where his true life began. He realized that becoming a Muslim is not only about recognizing God, but also about changing the way he thinks, feels, and lives. For years, he was accustomed to placing reason as king. Now he began to learn to place the heart as a guide and reason as a tool that submits to divine truth. In the midst of his busy schedule as a researcher and lecturer, Yusuf began to write books. His most famous book, entitled The Divine Equation, Mathematics, Cosmos, and the Qur'an, became a bestseller among Muslim and non-Muslim academics in Europe. In the book, he explains how the Qur'an contains not only spiritual messages, but also numerical patterns and structural balances that are impossible for ordinary humans to create. In one of his chapters, he wrote, "If the Qur'an is man-made, then it is a work of irrational genius. If it is not man-made, then the only logical explanation is that it comes from an omniscient source, and that is God." This book sparked much academic discussion. Some admired his approach, which was scientific but did not lose its spiritual value. Some sneered, accusing him of being too apologetic. But Yusuf was not deterred. He believed that his task was not to justify Islam with logic, but to invite people to think honestly and humbly. Because the truth will find its own way, as long as the heart is not arrogant. Personal transformation, from ignorance to submission. The changes in Yusuf did not only occur in the academic space. He began to change his lifestyle. His house is now simpler. He is no longer busy pursuing academic popularity, but is more focused on benefits. He began to memorize the Qur'an little by little, every dawn reading one page and writing personal reflections in a daily journal. In one of his notes, he wrote, "I used to think that happiness was finding the perfect formula. Now I know that happiness is when you feel close to the most perfect." His wife, a German woman who was originally secular, was initially confused by her husband's changes. But over time, she saw an extraordinary peace radiating from Yusuf. She saw how her husband was more patient, calmer, more grateful. After 2 years of witnessing the changes, his wife began to read the Qur'an. And one quiet morning, she said softly to Yusuf, "I want to know the God you worship." Yusuf's tears flowed, because for him, guidance is the most beautiful gift. And when the person you love also receives it, then that is an immeasurable blessing. His wife eventually converted to Islam, and the two vowed to live a new life as a Muslim family in a Western society that is increasingly thirsty for meaning, inspiring a new generation. On campus, Yusuf began holding weekly sessions called Faith and Formula. There, students from all walks of life, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, agnostic, even atheist, came to hear how the Qur'an views nature, numbers, and human existence. He never forced anyone to believe. He simply presented the data, pondered with them, and then let their hearts speak. In one session, an atheist student asked, "If God really exists, why did he hide himself and leave only a book?" Yusuf smiled and answered quietly, "God does not hide himself. He reveals himself through the universe, through the laws of physics, and through his perfect word. But if you only look for God with a telescope, you may not find him, because God does not need space to be present. He is present in a place that cannot be reached by any instrument, in the humble and searching hearts of humans." The answer became a viral quote among young academics. Some said they became interested in reading the Qur'an after hearing Yusuf's lecture. Some eventually converted to Islam. Others did not convert to Islam, but said they began to feel closer to God. Yusuf knew he could not change the world alone, but he believed that every heart touched was a victory, a bright and calm ending. A few years later, Yusuf Köhler was diagnosed with advanced cancer. While his friends were grieving, he appeared calm. He said, "I have spent my life searching for answers. Now I am ready to meet the one who is the answer." Despite his illness, he continued to write. His last book was titled The Last Letter of a Scientist, a collection of spiritual reflections from a former atheist who finally surrendered to Allah. In the last paragraph of his book, he wrote, "If you doubt the Qur'an, read it. If you read it with an open heart, you will hear a voice deeper than mere words. It is the voice of God calling you home." A few months later, on a quiet morning after dawn, Yusuf Köhler took his last breath. He died smiling, surrounded by his family, all of whom had now become Muslims. His body was prayed over by hundreds of students, lecturers, and friends from various religions. And on his tombstone, a sentence was written that he himself asked for before he died. "I used to look for numbers, now I find light." The legacy of a seeker of truth. A few months after Yusuf Köhler's passing, the atmosphere on the campus of the University of Berlin was still filled with a sense of loss. The classroom where he used to teach logic and mathematical metaphysics is now an annual seminar room entitled Köhler Memorial Lecture, where scientists from various countries discuss major themes science, spirituality, and the Qur'an. One of his students, Farid, is now a young lecturer teaching in the same department. In one of his first lectures, he said, "I know Professor Köhler not only as a scientist, but as a human being who dares to ask questions and is not ashamed to find answers. He taught us that faith does not mean abandoning reason, but placing it in its rightful place." Yusuf's legacy is not only in the form of books or lectures. He left thousands of digital notes, reflective writings that combine Islamic theology, symbolic logic, and Quranic numerology in an elegant and easy-to-understand way. These notes were eventually collected and published by his students under the title Mathematics of the Heart, A Scientist's Way Home. The book was translated into 12 languages and became a topic of discussion in various interfaith and scientific forums. Even the Vatican and Al-Azhar University held a joint symposium using the book as a primary source, all thanks to a man who began his search with just one small question. Is it possible for the Quran to have a perfect numerical structure? A message from one who has found it. A few months before he died, Yusuf recorded a short video for his students and future generations. The video is now often played at Islamic seminars and studies. In it, he says in a calm but meaningful voice, "If you are in doubt about the Quran, then do not rush to judge it. Read it, study it, question it, but do not close your heart, because the truth, even if it seems strange, will always greet those who sincerely seek it." It took me decades to realize that the numbers I had been chasing all my life were actually pointing the way to God, and I was lucky to get there before it was too late. Do not be afraid to seek the truth, even if you have to go down a lonely and silent path, because at the end of that path, you will find the light that has been waiting for you. The video is an inspiration for many young people who feel trapped between the worlds of logic and faith. It reminds us that faith and knowledge are not two opposing worlds, but two wings that strengthen each other to fly towards the truth. Conclusion: when knowledge bows to revelation, the story of Yusuf Köhler is not just the story of someone who converted to Islam. It is a story of intellectual honesty, spiritual courage, and the humility of a human being in the face of a truth that cannot be explained by logic alone. He proves that even in a world full of numbers, formulas, and cold rationality, there is still room for the warmth of the light of faith. He shows that the miracle of the Quran lies not only in the beauty of its language or its social laws, but also in the neatness of its internal logic, its unimaginable numerical structure, and its ability to answer the deepest doubts of a modern human being. Yusuf Köhler is gone, but his story remains. He has fulfilled his duty as a witness to the truth, and now that duty is passed on to anyone who still asks, still seeks, and still hopes to find light. Because that light is always there for those who want to open their eyes and hearts and say, "The truth comes from your Lord. So whoever wishes, let him believe, and whoever wishes, let him disbelieve." QS. Al-Kaf 29.